position between whether God exists or not exists to take out of these two?
It depends how you define reasonable.
Reasonable is what is tantamount to reason. So if I say, for example, this
But
gentleman doesn't
reasonable
exist.
can have reasonable, that's what I was asking. Do you mean reasonable as in reason or reasonable as in a social, reasonable, okay.
Reason.
Yeah.
Reason as in reason. So something that we can really appreciate through our intellectual inquiry,
Yeah.
and it makes sense to us.
Yeah.
Because we're not talking about gut feeling or blind faith as opposed to reason. So if we use reason and we have these two options, that the creator exists or doesn't exist, which one is more reasonable?
Well, do you want to answer? They're asking me all the questions.
And you're already a believer, right? So you're not a believer, so we need to see how have you arrived to this agnosticism and suspended that judgment, because agnosticism is basically suspending a judgment to make that leap towards this position or that position. Am I right?
Well, that's one way to define it, yeah.
Okay.
The other aspect, well, yes, that's one way to define it. When it comes to reasonable or reason, it depends on, to me, it would depend on how you arrive at your understanding or definition of reason. So there is the aspect of how you're saying, if we're going to defend it based on reason, or we're going to get to this decision, we're going to arrive at it through reason, then we're saying we're implying that we're adhering to all of the structure of the methods of science. But reason doesn't have to necessarily adhere to the methods of science. There are other aspects of what we would consider or define as reasonable.
Like?
Well, there could be, you could use reason to construct a good theology that would also arrive at the notion of a creator, or you could use reason to say, I buy into the scientific method, and from that construct an understanding of the worldview that doesn't have a creator. So it just kind of depends on where you fall in between those.
If you were to use
boundaries.
reason as what we understand by reason, is the existence of God a scientific question?
No.
Exactly. So we have to look for reasons beyond the scientific methodology, because science itself is not able to.
This was your idea.
Yeah, it's all right. Because science, it's not within the remits of science to answer that question. Because if you look at the methodology science operates under, observation, empiricism, and so on, it's not a scientific question.
It's not really, no.
Yeah. So then we have to use.
Because you have to start with what you're given under the scientific method. You start with the givenness of the world.
You're already assuming the world is rational. You're making.
Well, the idea of making an assumption about the world being rational is an assumption. I don't know that that's necessarily true. In philosophy, what would be considered like phenomenology, your starting point is that which is given to you, or givenness. So the things you experience, feel, touch, see, those kind of things.
Yeah, some of the things are axiomatic even for science to begin with, because without those, the axioms that you have taken as a fundamental truths, you can't just say, what, experimentation can lead to truth, because what experiment did you do to come to that proposition that's a true statement? So when it comes to then existence of questions of God, which is not the remits of science, with reason alone, then how can we answer that question? So let's use reasonable methodology that we can use within our parameters and paradigm of reason. Do you consider something has always been there, or do you consider there was at point absolute nothingness and then something came to be? This is now, we're not talking about science, we're talking about the world around us.
Yeah.
Because that then will drive us to make reasonable conclusions.
Yeah, I would say I don't know. I don't know that it's an answer that has, or a question that has an answer.
Okay. So let's see whether it does have an answer within the parameters of reason. When we say nothing, we really mean nothing. Nothing which has the absence of everything. And that includes not only time and space and gravitational fields it also excludes possibilities. So it doesn't have any possibility to even make anything, produce anything, generate anything, to bring about anything, any something. That's what we mean by nothing. Total absence of everything. So when we talk about quantum mechanics, in which particles apparently pops into existence, they don't come from nothingness. They just transform from one state to the other. That's all they're doing. And what that initial state of transformation that they come into our existence, it's something that we're trying to understand still. It's not absolute nothing, it's just transformation. When we talk about nothing,
it's transformation on a very small scale, right? That's the difference between the atomic and the general method.
Yeah, but when we talk about nothing, we're talking about absence of even those gravitational fields in which these transformation can happen. Total nothingness.
Yeah, that's your starting point. Sure.
Right. If there was such a thing, absolute nothingness, this will give rise to absolute nothingness forever and forever. There wouldn't be something. The fact that we have something today, you and I are something, it gives us a reasonable conclusion to take that there wasn't a time in the past there was absolute nothing. So there was always something.
Yeah.
That's the only reasonable option. There was always something.
Yeah.
If there was always something, then we can try to understand the nature of that thing that always existed, whether it went into its own self-transformation or not.
Yeah.
The fact that there is always something, that means that something that always exists, in a sense that it didn't come into existence. That's what it means, always in existence.
Yeah.
Come into existence means you have an agency which gave rise to that existence. But here we are talking about an existence that inherently necessarily exists, without anything or anyone or any agency bringing to existence. With this understanding in mind, we automatically would give certain qualities and characteristics to that thing.
Presumably, but the way I think of what you're saying is, we don't have to start with that dichotomy between nothingness and something. There could be other options that we don't know. That's why I started by saying I don't know. And the assumptions we're making is we're going to start with the notion of nothingness, which is a term, because you said we're talking about let's start with reality, but I think we're not really starting with reality, we're starting with semantics.
Something is part of reality.
Well, we're starting with, I said we started with nothing, and you wanted to define nothingness and then move towards something, the opposite of nothingness. These are semantic terms. My proposition was that we cannot conceive of a nothingness. We cannot conceive of a time before our time. So it becomes an endless repetition of argumentation if we cannot experience the thing in which we're arguing about or examining. So to me, it's like it's not a helpful starting place.
Okay, I would disagree there slightly. Why slightly? Because there are things that we cannot grasp fully. We cannot comprehend some things fully, like infinity, for example. Mm-hmm. Okay, very difficult to grasp, but we understand what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
When we have something, we know what something is.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, and I agree with you.
And we can understand the opposite to what something could be, but we may not fully comprehend what we mean, because that thing actually doesn't have existence anyway. It would not exist. But conceptually, we can understand that. But to the degree of what you're asking for, full comprehension, we might not be able to. But
I agree with that.
Yeah, that's fine. But at least we know that nothing that we are talking about could not have been there in our reality, because that would not have given rise to anything.
I don't know that I don't think I'm qualified to give a definitive statement on that.
But if you think about it, what are the other alternatives? Because sometimes
we don't know. That's what I'm saying.
No.
It's so far.
You see,
it's so far outside of our.
You said you're philosophically trained, so I can ask that question quite meaningfully, because philosophers often leave things room for maneuvering, but actually in reality, sometimes there are only binary options. Like, for example, the existence of things. Either things exists or it doesn't exist. There is no in between.
Well, there's, like you said, there's phase states and there's transitions.
No,
right?
in terms of existence of anything, either that thing exists or that doesn't exist. There is no third alternative. There are truly binary options.
Well,
What would be an alternative in between? Existence and non-existence? Half existence?
Well, potentially.
No,
I mean,
it doesn't make sense.
Well,
Half existence
that's what I'm saying.
is existence.
But if you're saying we can go all the way back and try to conceive of a nothingness, you're making the same move with the notion of existence. We can't conceive of either.
When we conceive of something, then there is not part something and not is something or nothing.
Yeah, as my philosopher professor always said, you can't poof and pop. If something's in existence, it's in existence. You just can't poof out of existence and then come back to existence.
Yeah, so something like which is existent, or nothing which is non-existent.
Yeah.
So there are truly binary options, and which our mind can accept. You know,
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and I understand what you're saying, and I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying. What I think my position to that statement would be, there's only certain things the human mind can conceive of. But that doesn't mean that's how in terms of reality, that doesn't mean that's how the universe functions. The universe doesn't function just within how my mind can conceive of it.
Correct.
So I'm like, I don't know, maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. From the perspective of what I can conceive of, sure, yeah.
Yeah, so if we are understanding this world, which is something, from the parameters of what we understand, reasons, with intellectual understanding and inquiry, then there has to be always something for that universe.
Well, but the important qualification there is for understanding this world insofar as I can understand it.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. But that doesn't necessarily mean that's the world as it exists.
But the reality of our world is such that it couldn't have been a result of nothingness.
As I understand it, right? I can conceive of it.
All our discussions and perceptions of reality is our understanding. But it doesn't mean our understanding is wrong, because our understanding of this reality is this understanding. And if you say, oh, it's wrong based on what? Why would our understanding be wrong based on a world that you can't even conceive of? That you don't know the reality that you're talking about, which doesn't exist.
But that's where you start brushing up against the hardcore definition of science, where like a hardcore definition of science or scientism is going to state that that which is real is what we would consider reality or fully material. Then we start to bump up against that once we say, I'm only considering the things that my mind considers, because my mind, as I consider things cultural, social, whatever, they're non-material. So it confronts a hard definition of scientism, because it's perceptual. It's just my perception.
But even philosophically, whatever school of thought in philosophy that you are inclined towards, when we understand this reality, you cannot just simply say, because I don't understand other realities which are potentially in existence, then this is not true. Because otherwise, everything should be, you hyper-skeptical about, like, do you really exist in this world?
Well, lots of people ask that. I mean, lots of philosophers ask that question.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If you're going to apply some kind of skepticism about, do we really understand truthfully or in truth about this reality, just because there's a potential reality outside our universe, then you should be truly hyper-skeptical of everything, that your own existence. But the fact of the matter is, you have somehow, stepped away from this kind of hyper-skepticism, and you practically, pragmatically, you say, no, yes, I know truthfully I exist. You've taken that position already. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a partner waiting for you over there. You would say she doesn't exist either. The fact that you're feeling a bit cold, your coat on and so on, you've already taken in.
Yeah.
It's called submitting to this reality, saying, I accept this reality is true.
But you can make that as a choice. It doesn't have to be, and that choice doesn't have to lead to despair. So you can be a hyper-skeptic and not despair at the choice you make to live pragmatically. Does that make sense?
Are you still hyper-skeptic about your own existence?
Well, in the terms of, it depends on how you would define hyper-skeptical. If by that you mean like the fact that I'm embodied in this time and place.
Do you really believe you exist and you're having a conversation with me?
Oh. Do you?
We have to exist.
I mean, I do, but do you is the question. Because this is the level of hyperskepticism that we need to analyze.
Unless we're, I mean, you know, I'm sure you've heard the philosophical theories about living within a machine.
Yeah. So, who am I speaking to? I mean, am I speaking to anyone?
Yeah, my name is Ben.
Yeah, Ben. So, you know, I acknowledge that you exist.
Yeah.
Because I heard you telling me your name,
Yeah.
and I'm having a conversation with you. So I'm not hyper-skeptical of your existence. So, truthfully, I know in truth of this reality that you exist, and you have an existence, and so do I, because I can make a distinction between you and my existence.
Yeah.
So if we operate within this pragmatic understanding of reality, that we are not hyper-skeptic just because of philosophically there's a potential reality out there, and because of that existence maybe everything else is untrue, we don't operate that way. Okay?
Well, I don't know if I grant you that.
So you're still telling me I'm speaking to no
because
one?
I think you can. I think you can operate that way. I think you can make a choice.
Okay. What's your name? Because
Yurgya?
Ben may think that you don't exist in his hyper-skepticism.
Yeah.
So
No,
So next time Ben comes and says-
I said I think you can make a decision.
yeah.
I think I think what you're driving at is that if I grant you what you want me to grant you, that would, if my position would automatically lead to despair and seeking and searching.
Why despair?
But
Why
that's
not
what I'm
happiness?
saying. I don't think it has to. I think you can actually
agree.
make a choice.
It doesn't have to be despair. In fact, self-realization of the truth or realization of the truth makes us even better content within ourselves. We feel more tranquility in our hearts knowing the truth. For example, imagine there was an orphan child. That child has some kind of feeling within the heart who's the real biological parents. The day he or she finds out, something is lifted from that heart. Now this is my mom and dad, for example. So when we understand realize the reality or appreciate the truth of the reality, truthfulness of the reality, we don't come into despair. We in fact, feel much more solace and tranquil and content. The contentment in the heart comes in. So once we know that we exist, once we know the reality is true of our existence, and once we know we are something and there cannot be absolute nothingness, that means something is going to be always there. This should not somehow make us feel like, oh, if that is the case, what is that something that was always there? Because that always there didn't begin to exist. That means it inherently exists by itself, within the qualities that is inherent within it. And one of that qualities is existence forever and forever, eternal with no beginning, and shouldn't have any influence of its existence, so it will be everlasting with no end. That entity that we're talking about, something that was always there, will also have the ability to have given the transformation to everything that is there. So it will have the power and the will, because transformation like this cannot happen without a willing choice to make. So automatically we are thinking towards or leading towards or leaping towards an agency which is self-aware or self-conscious, has energy and power, and has a will, and exists without a beginning. This is what we talk about when we talk about God, the creator, someone who has no beginning and no end, someone who is all-powerful, because there's nothing that can limit or restrain or put the power under any limitation, and has a will. Through this will, the creator has brought about our existence. So maybe that realization puts some people off from thinking along this route and accepting that, because it has consequences. Because it means I am a product of that creator, and I must have been created or brought about or brought into this existence for a reason. And am I fulfilling that reason or purpose? These are the things is what, from my experience, are preventing many of the atheists, I'm not talking about agnostics, many atheists, to accept the reality of a creator because of the consequences that it has. You see, if you're truly free of everything, then you don't have this kind of, some feeling like, oh, am I accountable? Because there's no accountability for whatever you do. But if there is a purpose of your creation and you are not created yourself, someone else did, then are you accountable for what you do? If there is an accountability, that means you can't do whatever you want to do just because of your freedom that you have. That stops many people saying, but I want to be free. I want to have a liberal mindset that whatever makes me happy, that I need to do as long as I don't harm anyone. That's the principle they've taken.
Yeah. One, I don't think though that, again, I would go back to where your starting point. I don't think hyperskepticism results in or discounts the ability to have a practical life or a pragmatic life.
Okay.
And two, I don't think that accountability is contingent upon God. So.
Good. So what's stopping from you, Ben, for example, knowing that this reality is true and this reality couldn't be a result of nothingness or chance, because there has to be something that always existed. The qualities that I talked about, self-awareness of that something that was always there with will and energy, because any willing agent which is self-aware, who created you, brought about you in this world, how are you reacting to this? I mean, how are you interacting with this agent? Are you finding out why this agency has created you? Are you willing to accept?
I don't grant you that I don't grant you that there's an agent.
Why not?
What? You went really fast through all that.
Yeah. So now you tell me.
You went from A to Z.
Yeah.
We were talking about hyperskepticism.
Yeah.
But I don't grant you.
If we grant that this universe is our reality that we see around Israel, if you grant that point,
but we never.
The moment
we never really came to a resolution on
right.
that. That can be,
if you grant that this is real, then all of that I've said then follows on. So your point so far is
that doesn't necessarily. Right?
Why not?
Whoa. One.
If you grant this is real,
let's say okay. Hypothetically, you grant that it's real, right? Because we never really had that resolution. Let's hypothetically do that. It doesn't follow that there's an agent, a creator agent.
So how do you then explain that something has all this transformation? Do you not consider that something that is inherently in existence without a beginning? There has to ultimately something always...
No, because then you have to get into the philosophy of time and what you mean by beginning and where do beginnings come from? Where does time come from? Is time just my phenomenological experience of time? Is time our understanding of time? What is time? And both scientists and philosophers don't have a definition.
No, whether you are aligned to an A theory or B theory of time, which one do you...
So how I don't know. I don't know that I'm qualified to make a stance on that position. I'm not a physicist. But that makes a complication into bringing terms in like beginning to something like the cosmos. I can't speak to the cosmos and if it did or did not have a beginning.
That's why the terms I've used is something always has to exist. That always includes in any definitions of time you have, because the absence of opposite to something is nothingness. If there wasn't nothingness, then something was always there. I'm using this word loosely. Whatever amount of time you want to give. If you want to just consider only the scientific definition of time, 13.67 billion, 8 billion years, was there a time? Even there wasn't time, there couldn't be absolute nothingness. There has to be something.
It's just something we can't conceive of.
No, that something, whether it's time independent, it was always there. It is there. Let's say it is there.
Okay, well,
it is there.
So if we grant you that, it is there, right?
So if it's there,
that doesn't have to be an agent.
If it's there and it's brought about this transformation by will, are you now disputing that?
No, but that's a leap.
Okay, so
you're saying you said the isness that you identified brings about through volition. Yeah. But the isness doesn't have to have volition.
Okay.
It doesn't.
So how do you account for transformation? By accident or by choice?
Movement. It could be movement. That's
any movement that is happening, any changes that occurs, either the change happens spontaneously, like an accident.
Not for Lucretius, right? Not Lucretius would be an accident. It's just an accident spontaneity.
So when you say accident, so is this accident part of an inherent law?
No. That's Lucretius, right? Going back to the Greeks and the Romans, Lucretius would have said it was just it's called the swerve, right? It's just an atom swerved and hit another atom, and that's that.
No, when something behaves in a certain way, what governs that behavior?
That was his whole point. Nothing. It was the swerve. It was completely outside anything that which had happened before. It was just a.
Yeah, but is it meaningful?
It doesn't have to be.
No, we're trying to make sense of the reality. If something just happens, this is not an explanation, because we know in our reality, for example, nothing just happens. There is a cause behind everything. There are rules, maybe things are following. So things don't just happen by, like lotteries, people don't just win lotteries by accidents, randomness. It's operating under a law. It's just we don't know all the variables. If you flip a coin, do you really think?
But to say that though is also meaningless, right? To say it's a law, but we don't know the variables. That's a cop out.
It's not
right?
when we say law is such a regularity of patterns that we're observing.
Yeah,
that regularity, does it come from a choice?
But to make the assumption that something happened I can't define, therefore it must have happened because of a law, even though I don't know the variables yet, is making assumptions about laws or how they work, or that laws can't evolve themselves. It just makes a bunch of leaps in understandings about laws.
Think about it. Evolving. To evolve into something, you should already have an existent properties or laws to transform into something else. So you have to, if something exists always, or something is always, inherently must possess some eternal laws. Let's call it, for the sake of not finding the right terms to say it, pre-existent laws. Because without these, there cannot be a secondary transformation.
Well, that's
you can't have that.
Well, the physicist Lee Smolin wrote an entire book about how what you called eternal laws actually do evolve over time, that they're not eternal, that there's actually no such thing as an eternal law comprised within the physical universe.
No, physical universe, when the laws...
I promised my partner I would take her to a play.
Okay, so...
And we just wanted to see this because we've never been here before.
Ben, it's been nice talking to you.
I'm sorry.
No. Of course. I apologize for keeping you that long, and my apologies to your partner.
I didn't get your name, though.
My name is Mansour.
Mansour.
Nice. If you come by again in Speaker's Corner, I'll be more than happy to speak to you again and just go around some of those points that we were just touching upon. Because it's quite important that we arrive to meaningful answers to this question, because I know you're not hyper-skeptical, you're pragmatic, you're waiting for a partner, you know she exists, you know you have a commitment to make, and you have to go somewhere, right? So,
nice to
meet you.
Yeah,
Take care. Later. My apologies for keeping him long.
Okay, don't knock that down.
Yeah. Yeah, just 1 second.